Hi. If it wasn't for a guy named Tree, I never would have been the fire chief. I arrived late at college for my first semester, and the only dormitory room left was a double that I had to share with a guy who introduced himself as Tree. He was from California, had a blonde afro. He usually wore like a striped t-shirt and cut-off jeans and Birkenstock sandals. He was he reminded me of like Dennis the Menace on a surfboard or Carrot Top. So kind of a combination of those two. And what he was wearing and a backpack was all he brought with him. I came from New Jersey with a U-Haul trailer filled with all the things that are necessary for freshman year at college. So I had my stereo and my boxes of records. I had my hot plate and my pressure cooker, my bicycle, my guitar, just the basics. Tree was, he was a free spirit. He didn't believe in locking doors. So, he'd look at me and he'd say, when I suggested we should lock the room, he'd say, "That's not cool, man. That's, you're uptight." So we'd go off, I'd lock the door. I'd come back a few hours later. The door was unlocked. Sometimes it was open. Nobody was inside. And I would talk to Tree. I'd try to reason with him. But he would just say, "Oh, man, you're too uptight." So it wasn't working out. I was from New Jersey, and everybody expected to get ripped off at some point or another. That was just the way it was. I could see we were going to run into a dilemma. So I went to see the dean of students, a guy named Neil. Neil had a full beard, big glasses, and he was always puffing on a pipe. And he talked. He was a soft talker, if you know what I mean. He looked like this. And he looked at me and he said, "So Mitch, I think you can reconcile these problems with Tree." I said, "No, Neil, I've been trying to deal with this guy for weeks, and I'm not getting anywhere. I don't know what to do anymore, but I worked for 2 summers pushing carriages into Valley Fair supermarkets so I could have enough money to buy all this stuff. I'm not going to leave it in an unlocked room." So Neil thought for a while. He was there puffing on his pipe and shuffling his papers, and he looks up at me through a cloud of smoke and he says, "How'd you like to have a single?" I said, "A single? That's fabulous, Neil. I would love a single. Why didn't you offer me that in the first place?" "Well, you're going to have to join the fire crew. They're 1 guy short." I said, "The fire crew?" And as I found out, the main building on campus was built in the early 1900s, primarily out of wood, and the only way they could get insurance was to have a fire crew on site. So I thought this was a solution to my problems. I said, "Yes, Neil, I'm in." I went back to my room. I said, "See you later, Tree." He said, "Cool, man," because he was as happy as I was. And I went off to my fundamentals of firefighting, and now I was a college firefighter. And I was in my new room, and it was awesome. It was huge. All my stuff from New Jersey fit inside. We were in a separate wing, very quiet, above the school cafeteria, and it was right next to the equipment room. The equipment room was lined with rubber coats and helmets, and there were these big boots and lots of ropes and air packs and axes, and they had these wire mesh, they were stretchers, I guess, and you had to lower people down from a burning building in these things. It was fabulous. And it had a phone. This was the emergency fire phone. I was supposed to pick up the calls, and if I needed to make an emergency call, I could use the phone. So this was fabulous. So sometimes when you get a job, it has perks. Even if you don't go out for this job and you just kind of fall into it, it has perks. We used to have awesome parties in this dorm area. When my friends came to visit from New Jersey, they always had a place to sleep, usually in the wire mesh stretcher. I didn't have to go down the hall and use the pay phone because I had the emergency phone. And I guess the coolest thing was whenever one of the guys on the fire crew thought his girlfriend was fooling around, we would have a drill in the middle of the night, and we would see who was coming out of the co-ed dorms. They would file out one at a time. So that was one of the wonderful things. The next semester, Tree did not come back. I think he didn't have the right clothing for the New England winters. I stayed on. The fellow ragtag team of firefighters eventually elected me to be the fire chief, and fortunately there never was any burning of the building. There was no reason to save the building, so the biggest thing we ever had, the closest I probably ever came to fighting a fire or seeing a big blaze, was turning up that stereo and listening to Johnny Cash sing "Ring of Fire."